Hello, Mike.
Wait a minute. Hello.
Hello to you. Hello to everybody. This is the Pencil and
Hello
Pencil.
to everyone. Oh, I see you got a new little thing there.
Yeah,
Your
we can do.
new little bug.
We can add a little bug. You want to add a little bug to you?
Yeah, you can add Beret Man.
What would you like to add to it?
Little bug. There you go. Little bug. There you go. I'm just a little bug.
Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Conley. I'm a cartoonist, web cartoonist of the comic strip The Middle Age, available at Middle Age Comic, Webtoons, Tapas, Go Comics, etc., and so forth. I would be remiss. I would be remiss if I didn't introduce my co-host, the Tower of Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the maestro of mark making, with his delightful chapeau, Mr. Mike Manley.
Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, it's been a little cool here in the Northeast with all it was very blustery the last 2 days. Luckily, in Philly, we are still snowless. We have not had any. I looked out the window. There was like little flurries going by, but up in in the north of us, they got hammered pretty good. So
yeah, I know some folks up in Vermont who are snowed in. Only way to contact the outside world is with their landlines. So
for younger
viewers, a landline is, I would explain.
I think our viewers are probably of the age that they remember a landline. In fact, I still have my phone from when I bought this house, and it's a landline. But what happened is about 15 years ago, there was it was one of those hurricanes that went through, like Gloria or whatever, went through, and it tore down a bunch of lines, and it tore the phone line down. And so I think at that time I had like MCI or one of those other phone companies. But the reason I always kept it was that it worked because it was hardwired into the pole. So, your remote phone, your radio phone, your cordless phone, all the other things wouldn't work. That worked. But what happened is that the sub phone company I had my service through had to subcontract guys to come out and fix the pole, fix the thing. And the guy couldn't fix he came out twice and didn't fix it. And so they said, oh, well, because he didn't fix it, if he comes out now, the next time it's $150 an hour. And I'm like, the hell with it. So when that happened,
were they charging you?
They were charging me, yeah. So after that was it. I never had a phone after that. That was it. I was done. I never had a landline after that. So that's when I went to just having a cell phone all the time. So
yeah, I don't. Every place I've lived has got the landline jack. I don't think I've had one since I was a kid. So I'm so high tech.
Yeah. But
hardly.
I still have that old Bell Atlantic telephone, which weighs like it's like a bowling ball.
Sure, that kind of.
Yeah, I mean it's great. I mean it's could still use it as a prop like you would always see in the old movies. That's one of the things I don't like about drawing modern comics is you have to draw people using cell phones, right? Everybody's on like this is not a sexy shape.
No, that's rough.
Right. So but with an old phone, it was an interesting shape. You had the cord, you
haven't mixed it up like all these people who talk like this, who talk like they're, I don't know what that move is.
Is that like smoking your cigarette that way? Like you're an evil villain?
Yeah.
You hold your phone out.
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. It's very much, or the harmonica, like it's supposed to be the keyboard. how did we end here? How did we end up here? I was right, because Jamar's not here to keep us on track. That's what it is.
Oh, well, he's quite the phone aficionado. So, and in fact, he was affected by the blustery weather because a branch broke off his tree and dented his car.
Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah. So see, I told him it's lucky it wasn't like one of those omen deaths where the branch goes through the roof and impales him.
Yeah, no, not this early in the season of Pencil to Pencil. We save that for the finale.
That's for the Halloween zombie
cliffhanger
podcast.
Well, tonight we're in for a treat. We're always in for a treat. It's a nonstop parade of treats. But this week, Mike Manley is going to walk us through some layout process, going from script to the page. Not only showing us examples of some previous projects he worked on, but actually doing that live on the stream, taking us from the script to the pencil page. Because I'm very excited about this. We were talking about what this week's episode should be about, and when Mike said that one, I'm like, ooh, please. So
yeah, I was trying to think of something that I think a lot of people get stuck at or struggle with, and actually, to me, the most important part of the job is the layout part, right? Because if it doesn't work at the layout part, you can really have great rendering and great inking and fantastic coloring, but it's just not going to be effective to serving the story. And early on in my career, that is something that I think I had a natural sense of it, but then I really started like paying attention to that specifically, and what artists like. There's artists you like their drawing, there's artists you like their inking, and then I was thinking, well, who are the artists that I like the layout, and
do you like the explosive layouts, the kind of Neil Adams, Steranko kind of frenetic, broken page layouts, or do you prefer the kind of more rigid grid format?
I think it really depends upon the kind of story, right? Because when I started paying attention, that's a great point. When I started paying attention, I would look at somebody like Neil Adams when he was not his DC work, but when he came to Marvel, and he was doing the X-Men, he was doing all those like sideways, and and I think that was his way. I never asked Neil this question, but that was his way of trying to make a Marvel comic, right? Competing with Kirby, that sort of energy, because Marvel work, their comics were much more energetic than the DC stuff. And I even noticed that as a kid, right? So, but I actually preferred his DC work. And so the three artists I really honed in on was Joe Kubert, Kirby, and actually Walt Simonson. Because Walt has a very the way he designs time, the way he breaks up the panels, the way he directs your eye flow, even though I don't draw anything like Walt. I remember when he was doing like Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica and some of his, I really got into like how he was playing around with the page layouts. And then Joe Kubert, who I think is the best ever. He's like the master layout storytelling artist. And I think when Neil Adams started growing at DC, he started looking at Joe Kubert, and his work became more lyrical or poetic. And especially like Kubert's Enemy Ace or his Tarzan, or like he laid out Rima. He used to lay out work for other artists, especially the artists who came from the Philippines. He would do layouts, very much like what happened with Buscema. Buscema would do these layout sort of tight pencils, and then they would have somebody who was a really good renderer, a really good drawer, like Alfredo Alcala or a lot of the Filipino artists could finish it. You know, if you gave them a rough drawing, like Ricardo Villagrán was like that. If I gave him a rough layout, he could do all the drawing because he drew so well when he inked. So I really started paying attention to Joe Kubert, and that clicked in my head. And the way that he moved the camera around, where he placed the camera, was always in the service of the story. And then I looked at somebody like Kirby, who never did slashed panels, never did sideways panels, never did angular panels. He always worked in a grid. And if you look at his best work to me, which was like his the Fantastic Four, it's a grid. Ditko, it's a grid. Gil Kane would add those horizontal, a lot of horizontal panels, a lot. He picked up on that. And then later on, when Miller was doing Daredevil, I really liked the way he laid out stuff. But I think, you know, it's sort of adaptable to the type of story that you're doing. Because if let's say you're doing a non-superhero comic, you may not want to draw slashier. You know, like in the 90s, everybody looked like you threw the comic in a blender, and, you know, you had ragged borders and, you know,
in a good way.
Yeah. You know, and what happened was, it was excitement, but not in service of the story.
Right.
Because I defy, as much as I admire some of the Image guys, I defy you to really recall any of their stories. You recall the art or the excitement of the art, but I believe that was in spite of good storytelling.
Right.
Because good storytelling is, you build up, you build to a point, then you go down. You build to a point, you go down. And just making everything exciting doesn't. If everything is exciting and crazy, then nothing is exciting and crazy, right? Like Adams would do those crazy X-Men things, but not every page was like that.
Right.
You know,
I remember Toth talked about that, how his layouts were so mind-blowing. Some of his crazier layouts where, you know, it's just beautiful stuff and all over the place. And then he would have some that were just grids. And those were kind of like almost like melodic. It would be like, okay, here's the part of it. We're going to bring everything down a little bit, and the next page will explode. And then we're going to bring it down a little bit, and it'll explode.
It's what's in the panel and serving the story that gives the panel the impact, not the shape of the panel. The shape of the pen, all of it is related to, as I'll go through here, to me, it's all related to telling the story, right? Some compositions work better as horizontal compositions. Some compositions work better as squares. If you do several things in a row, several panels the same size in a row, you can indicate through doing that as a layout that you're saying that these are equal, or it's like a beat. When I would teach storyboarding, I would say, you know, when you watch a film, it's like listening to an orchestra, and you have a lot of different, you've got, you know, the woodwinds, and you've got the violins, and you've got the horns, and you've got all these different sections playing, and then it's all arranged to give you a specific feeling, a specific tempo. They're not all now just all going crazy, right?
Right.
And the hardest thing, I think, at the beginning, and this is something I really came to focus on after becoming a teacher, was that in the beginning, everybody thinks being close is exciting. Everything big, everything big. And almost every single young artist is at least 25 to 50% too close to start out with, because the environment, the background, the composition, if you're just so close, you're not seeing anything.
Is that something you saw in your own work? Is that something like the biggest mark of evolution, or like maybe the most telltale mark of evolution in an artist?
Well, I think what I learned to focus on through studying someone like Hubert or even Kirby, and Kirby, I mean, both of them are very dynamic, but they also had very quiet moments. And you don't really think about quiet moments when you think of somebody like Jack Kirby. You think, Kirby crackles and big square fists blasting people, but he had amazing amount of subtle drawing and storytelling, even within his stylization. And my problem in the beginning sometimes would be like, I would think of more than one way. Well, I could do it this way, or I could do it that way. Do I go in close, or do I go far, and there was also a lot of pressure at certain points in my career, where, one editor might like something to be more exciting. Another editor may sort of get mixed messages, because nobody's teaching you this stuff, right? Now you can go to school and you can have somebody like me teach you. But when I was coming along, there was the Kubert school, which I didn't go to, although I know a couple people went to the Kubert school. But you basically, you read comics, and, everybody had the seventh book, and everybody sort of had, some people had the Eisner book, but you really sort of had to teach yourself on your own. And you taught yourself by analyzing the work intellectually of the people that you admire. And you'd have to think, why does this work? Right? Now you can go and you can take college classes, and there's a million videos and things on the internet, like this podcast, that says, well, this is how you can kind of bake a cake. This is how you can kind of do it. This is how you can kind of lay out a page. I didn't have
What's
any
an
of that.
What's an establishing shot?
Right. Like in the beginning, people would say, you want to have an establishing shot. But there's a couple different kinds of establishing shot. There's like the planet Earth, and then there's the shot of the Brooklyn Bridge. There's a shot of the Daily Bugle, or the shot of somebody's house, right? How close are you in? If you go establishing shot, well, here's the Milky Way galaxy. Everything takes place in the Milky Way galaxy. How close are you? There's a medium shot, or medium establishing shot, or close up, or medium close up. I didn't really, to be honest, think of those terms, even though I use that. I use those shots, but I don't think I really thought of them in that way until I started working in animation, in storyboarding, right? Because the script might say that, or you start thinking, when I started studying film, you learn the 6 shots. And every film is basically made up of one of those kinds of shots, partially because the difference between comics and film is, like, you see this little box we're in. Every single movie you see is that composition. Maybe it's 70 millimeter, right? So maybe it's a little bit, but if you're watching a 70 millimeter film, widescreen, everything is within. They don't suddenly have one going this way and then one really narrow. It's all within that frame. And so you don't have to worry about changing the size of your composition. And you don't worry about the real estate on the page and how many panels and how do you fit the word balloon. That's all comes in comics, but you do have to think about your shot choice. So that goes into part of what we're going to talk about, and what I'm going to try to show tonight, which is my thought process about why I choose, or maybe I want to choose certain shots. And sometimes you may have more than one solution, and then you have to sort of make a choice. Well, I like this, but I don't get that.
Right.
Well,
there's a question we got from Shelley later on YouTube. I touched on it, had it on the screen for a moment there, but would be interested in your opinion of the Webtoons infinite vertical layouts.
They are interesting. I did a webcomic and I played around with that. And it is sort of an interesting process, which you can take advantage of in the way that you can have something, if something is scrolling, you can take advantage of, well, there's going to be something here that comes into view. And you can take into advantage this movement. So there's a movement that you don't get with a static comic page. You move your eye through the page as you read it. So you had this. So in my webcomic, I took advantage of the fact that I would do this. I did a couple of really long sort of establishing shots, and then I put the object, I think it was a drone flying, and as you scrolled, the drone was in different shots of, so it's like one long background, and then you draw the drone in different shots, and so it's sort of like it's moving.
Right.
It's sort of a hybrid. I mean, how do you feel about it? I mean, you done it probably longer than me.
I like it. Its lack of horizontal panel design, panel arrangements, really, I feel that it's hard. You can't do some sort of panorama. There's no Panavision.
Well, you can, but it has to be
right. So incredibly vertical. So it's perfect for someone falling, or it's perfect for incredible, something like from outer space to landing in someone's neighborhood. But it's very weird in terms of, well, I won't sacrifice my story for it. The way I still do my comic, it's primarily meant for print, and I translate it as best I can for their vertical format, because who knows when a website's going to go away. But I miss horizontal landscapes in their format. I feel like stories can use them. So I think it's this thing where you wouldn't want, I don't know if you'd want to tell a Western in their format. I don't know if you want to have that establishing vista. Lawrence of Arabia wouldn't work in the Webtoons format.
Well, yes, that's very yeah.
Well, but I think you'd want to write stories for that medium. Is basically what it comes down to.
Right. So I'm going to pull up my Webtoon here, and let's see if I can find that. Well, actually, if you want to share the screen,
sure, be happy to. As soon as it pops up, I'll.
Oh, I have to do the.
Yeah.
I have to do the thing. Okay, so here's my Webtoon, which I never finished. It was like one of those things, like I think it was a contest, and you had to do so many things and I was just slammed trying to do this in my regular stuff. So I was aware of the fact that you do this, right? And the other thing is, at that time, I don't know if it's better now, it was so difficult to figure out how to load the stuff up. I had to like make the thing all together and then cut it apart, I guess. That's how I did it, so that I could have the little black space, right? So this space, to me, is active because it you go from this to this. So you have this, like, that's a transition, right? And so that it's all the same, right? All those little transitions are the same. And then so that's a longer one. So I was aware of the fact that once you go and if you're reading it on your phone, which is designed to, I'm aware of the fact that when you do this, right, you get this transition. And that's a different rhythm, right? And then you get same shot, and then you get the robot's foot coming down, right? So I was aware of the fact that trying to take into account the difference between reading a page and scrolling through. And then I think we're going to be coming up to that. So I look at this as sort of like a grid, but again, the difference is I can make that panel. So I'm thinking, when you first load that in, you see that.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you scroll, you get, so it's sort of like motion, right? It's implied motion because you're moving, and as you're moving, you're seeing the sound effects. So it's sort of like a cheap animation, right? So I was trying to if I still think about going back and finishing this. I still think about how would I play around with this format, and I like being able to do these like really saturated colors. So I really like the format, but so again, in this case, I'm almost trying to do like a letterbox.
Mm-hmm.
I may now have, if I was doing this now, I mean, that was the hard thing about learning the format. There's always these, I would actually have more room to isolate that more.
Yep.
So
it's seen by itself. So it's not seen in the context of something else necessarily.
Right. So like here, I might have had I was playing around with the format. It's sort of a learning curve, right? So here you get this whole thing. Here you get this, but you also get some of the other panels. So looking at that now, so I equate, because coming from comic books, I equate the size of the panel or the close-up as being, like, if I was doing if this was a comic book page, I'm close in, so the panel might be small because I don't need so much space, right? But I have to consider as a webcomic that I have these borders, these transitional blocks, right? So I have to consider that I have these transitional blocks. So now, if I were to do this now, I would add more black space so you wouldn't see any of the panel between. Right. But it was pretty hard in the beginning to sort of even get the stuff loaded up. So there was another, another longer panel. So you get your horizontal, but then you also get your vertical, right? So here comes so this is the long panel, right? So you see zooming, 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 right? As it flew over the falls. So I was taking into account that this drone flying and thinking of it as like a movie pan, right? Like an animation. You're not getting any movement, but the movement is created by your scrolling, right? And so I could take advantage. That's the only way I could do a panorama. So I was trying to think of like, well, this is sort of a hybrid. And then here again, a hybrid of inset panel along with overlap panel, which now I'm not sure whether I would do that now, whether I would just do separate panels. You know, I'm really trying to break down the action, right? And so I'm not sure now if I would lay those panels out that way, because I'm not sure if it's as effective as it could be. But again, you know, this is all learning. The only way you can learn this is to do it, right? So again, I'm thinking, okay, boom, right?
Yeah, that's
You
effective.
get that, and you get that motion because you're scrolling. So I did want to make sure that when you start reading the sound effect and you go on, that other figure was not visible, right? So again, there's a formatting issue with this because of the limits of having to fit everything on the screen. But I could do a lot of stuff like have the character fall in the water, pan with the water, you know. So I really wanted this sort of silent beginning to the beginning of the story. But again, you know, things like making these panels smaller. I don't know. Does that work? Did I need to do it? Does that, going from a full, you know, sort of full screen?
It has a different feeling. I'm not sure if
Right.
it's a feeling you want to evoke, but it does feel different.
Right.
Especially given that, I mean, we're seeing this in the environment with the white borders to the left and right, whereas on the phone those aren't there. It's all, everything gets a lot more immersive when you don't have anything around it like that.
Right. You know, again, you know, trying to sort of like inject two things going on: him hearing or detecting life signs, so it was very interesting to try it. Um, there's some things I like about it. And the other thing too is I was thinking, well, maybe I would repurpose this as a book, as a comic. So there would be some reformatting that would be required to do that. And then, of course, then the coloring here, which is very saturated, it's all in RGB, would be CMYK. So there might have to be some adjustments. So,
Beautiful.
so
Nicely done, Mike.
So as a webcomic, that there is a difference of layout, right? Because I'm thinking, and I actually drew little layouts. I storyboarded like 4 episodes, little layouts all on top of each other, right? But it was Mimi that helped me a lot by figuring out how to upload it, because their uploading process in the beginning was like, what, you know, and you would put it up and like it didn't
It's gotten
publish
better.
right, and,
It's
you
gotten
know,
better.
yeah. So like the only way we really learned how to do that was actually to go see a YouTube video, because their website was not really good at doing that. So basically what I did is I had to make a really long, I had to put all my panels together in a really long, super high, the file was like 1,000 megabytes or something, and then cut it into the different pieces and then load, I think, like 30 frames at a time. So
Sure.
again, it was like all this other stuff, technical stuff on top of just drawing.
Yeah.
Right. Um, I don't know how it is now because that was a couple of years ago. But I
You
do
still have
think,
to you still have to upload things in order, but it will slice up larger images for you. So if you go over by 10 pixels, you don't have to worry about, oh no, I have to upload those to 2 chunks again. So they did make it a little bit easier.
right. But I mean, you're doing the middle age, but you're thinking about print from the beginning. So do you have to rejigger the web tunes version versus what you put on another site?
Yeah, I do. I do. I've created, so I have some sort of templates, and I actually think about it when I'm laying out the page, how it's going to look on Webtoons. Sometimes I'll draw the page or a panel 2 different ways, or I will think about how the lettering is going to break in a way that I can I can shrink the panel down and then stack the word balloons and have it kind of, sort of follow their way down on the screen before you get to the panel. Um, but it's all an afterthought. I don't. I've got a lot of lovely readers on Webtoons, and the conversation there is always really good. The readers seem engaged, but I can't think of that as my primary method of. That's not the long-term method of delivery. It's got to be my own website. It's got to be the books.
Right.
These things will exist long after the those websites go away.
Well, Webtoons can merge with some other company tomorrow, and it's all
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
Right.
They do one terms of service tweak that everyone goes, oh no, you're not going to have rights to my thing forever or whatever.
Right.
It's too
Well,
easy for them to mess up.
and like I
And,
said, when I was doing it, and then I helped Mimi work on her Angel Eye comic for another contest. What I have not seen, and maybe there is, and I'm not aware of it. I've never seen any dialogue or discussion about format issues. And it might be maybe because most of the readers are young, so they're just consuming, and they're not concerned with the formal qualities of the format. Like there's a lot of discussion and context, intellectual discussion about the formal qualities of putting together a comic page, like in the Will Eisner book, right? There's a lot of stuff like that where people discuss the or Scott McCloud's book, right? Why this panel, how many panels, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if it really matters to the 12-year-old who's reading Trashbird on Webtoons, right? They're just consuming, and they're not even like the normal fan that we're used to, because they're not collecting.
right.
They're just consuming.
Right.
So if you're not collecting, does that mean that you don't really, you're just like, oh, I read my Trashbird, or I read my Lore Olympus, or whatever. I just read that today. Great. I'll wait for that. There's no, maybe because it's so new, we haven't gotten to the second or third generation of people making web comics to where that becomes a.
What's the aspect that is missing, Mike? I'm not sure if I'm following what.
The intellectual aspect to playing with a format. Like I was trying to do, right? I was trying to apply in my own way an intellectual aspect to how I was going to lay out that story based upon the fact that I scrolled.
Right.
Which is not what you do when you read a comic book.
Right. I think there's absolutely on Webtoon series that do that. There are ones that play with the form. There are easy things. I think the medium has lent itself to people doing interesting things with layouts. Like the story starts and it's sort of this evocative symbol, and then it's a few lines of dialogue, and you scroll a few more lines of dialogue, almost like poetry, as it leads you down the page and then leads you to something which recontextualizes what you just read. So people are definitely aware of the format and they're using it in that way. I'm not sure if there's very few people who have used it as effectively as or used it more effectively than you did in that sample you showed us, because you bring that kind of storyboarding a sense. I mean, the idea that you just said panning, that's kind of that's from a different medium. That line, that description.
Well,
The idea that you can't see this thing yet, but as you move the page, you can. So the way the turn of the page works in a comic book, there is that function in a scrolling environment where you can suddenly get surprised with something, but you don't have that drum beat of a comic page. Flip, surprise, flip, surprise.
Right. And then you have the intervals between the panels, which can actually be a thing, right? It could be a statement, of time. Just even the time of scrolling is like flipping a comic. When you get to the bottom of the page and then you flip and something explodes or there's a big fight or what, you sort of build up to that. You build up to it with a webcomic doing this way.
Anyone telling the origin of Batman is just going to have pearls falling down a page as you scroll and scroll and scroll. There's more pearls.
Right. So now, I know that there's that Batman comic that was on Webtoons.
Yep.
But I don't know. Again, I just think people read Webtoons in a very different way. So I'm going to share something before we get into the okay. So can we see this? Can you see that?
I can. I'm adding it right now.
Okay. So this is from Darkhawk 30, which came out already 2 years ago. It was the 30th anniversary of Darkhawk. And one of the tasks I had was, because they were launching a new Darkhawk series, they wanted to celebrate basically they were killing off this version of Darkhawk, and then there was going to be another version of Darkhawk. Somebody else was going to get the jewel. And so my job was to do a new issue like it was 30 years ago, now 32 years ago. So I was trying to sort of mimic my storytelling and mimic my style of drawing. I even got out my old stuff to look at it. So to make it look like, oh, here's a 2021 issue of Darkhawk that they found that they just never printed. Right.
Can you zoom in on that, Mike, or maybe shrink your preview browser so it's more horizontal than vertical? And if you alter the shape, there you go.
So one of the things I got the plot from Danny Fingeroth, and what I did is I had a sketchbook, and I laid out on one page. So this is one page of a sketchbook, right? And what I did is I laid it out 4 pages on one page.
So, you're working traditionally here.
So this is color erase pencil and making marker. So what I did is I went through the whole script and I laid everything out. I think I had like 5 pages like this, right? I think I have another page here, right? You can actually see the sketchbook. Can you see that?
Yep. Well, I think I can. What part are you talking about specifically?
Can you? Well, let's see. Can you see? Oh, okay. Hold on a second. You're only showing that.
Yeah, you might only be able to show one document, one preview window at a time. And you can find Mike Manley on Instagram at instagram.com/drawmanley. I'm going to keep adding.
Here's one of the pages.
Got it.
All right. So what I did is I went through and it was a plot, which means that sometimes I decide how many, pages there are. I was trying to find Danny's script. So they might say pages 14 through 13 or 14 through 15, these things happen. Then it's up to me to decide how to break it into panels. Right.
How succinct is that description? And this is what they call the Marvel method, right?
Right. This is the Marvel method. So the Marvel method is basically a specific, you're telling a specific story, but how many panels can sometimes be up to the artist. I mean, it's always up to you anyway as an artist. They may say one panel, but you may go, well, this might be better than two panels. I mean, I work with Tony DePaul on the Phantom. I get a full script. It describes what happens in every panel. But sometimes I add panels, or sometimes I will combine a panel if I feel that it makes sense to do it as the story. I even done that on Judge Parker, where I know sometimes you'll have one character talk, one panel. Then another character who's talking to the first character, close up in another panel. And to me, what that does, if you do that too much, is you have one person talking, another panel, another person talking, another panel, maybe those two people talking. But I like to see characters looking at each other, acting. And so I try to combine that at least as often as possible. And then if you have the close-up or the medium close-up of the person, then there's a reason why you're seeing that person's face close-up. Do you need to see the person's face close-up, or do you not need to see the person's face close-up? It's like if you're watching a film, you might see two characters talking to each other. And then you might see another angle of them talking. And then you might see a close-up on one of them saying something.
When you're collaborating with a writer like that, say Tony, or with any other writer, and they provide you with a script, or let's say it is a more long form complete script, and you're going to combine those panels together, what is your approach for that? Do you say, I've read the script, I'm thinking about combining these two? Or do you go immediately into a sketch and say, what do you think of this? Or is at this point you have such a relationship with Tony that you have carte blanche to make changes as you think it'll work better visually?
Yeah, well, I think Tony and I have a natural understanding that if I had a really big question, I just call him on the phone or send him an email and ask him, right? But I think he trusts my storytelling instincts enough to know that if I feel like, I need, like a lot of the story we're working on recently, he will give me a whole strip to have just one single image, and then I can float the balloons. But sometimes I feel like, well, I don't need that big long image. It might be better to have two panels, where it's a long panel and an inset panel. So it would be better if the last line of the Phantom also shows his face saying the line, right?
Right.
And again, that is like your instinct as a storyteller. Somebody else may be fine and do it the other way, and it'll work. But it just comes down to, like, how does it feel to you? To me, these characters are actors, even though they're drawing. I'm thinking about them as living, breathing, acting, moving characters that I'm almost like going, taking a snapshot, right? So one of the things I read somewhere about Joe Kubert, going back to what I was talking about earlier, is he would lay out two pages facing each other. He did that so he could see, because when you're reading a comic book, after you open the splash page and you turn, you're always seeing two pages, right, unless there was an ad. You're always seeing. So he was aware of how this goes down and flows into this. Right. So I'm always aware of this, right? like even the angle of this truck goes up here.
This is a perfect segue to a question from Tim Fielder on Facebook. Question for you, Mike. Your breakdowns are incredibly tight. I'm debating the idea of doing my work 2 pages at a time in Clip Studio Paint. That way I can get more work done, yet still have more continuity on display as I work. And do you ever do that? And I guess you can say clearly you do that here physically, but do you also do that digitally?
I don't. When I'm working on the strips digitally, you can only see one at a time, so it's impossible. I could do this on the Cintiq, but I just hate doing it that way. I hate drawing. I like just a piece of paper and a pencil. I'm old school. That's how I learn. That's how my chops work. That's how my instinct work. That's I feel comfortable with that. I love working on I love inking digitally and even drawing digitally, but for somehow, give me that piece of paper, give me that pencil, give me that mark. This is how I relate to it. It's like some writers still write on a typewriter, an old typewriter. They like type it on an old typewriter. You could do what I do here digitally, but I think the problem is, all right, you see the screen. Well, you got to zoom in on anything you're working digitally. So if I go in to draw this, right? If I go in and I make this big enough, I make this big enough that I can draw it. Well, look what happens. You can't draw the other. You don't see the other stuff. Right. And so I think that's a problem and a disconnect for me. Now, maybe other people wouldn't have that problem, but I actually like seeing all those pages. Now, when I was working on Batman or Darkhawk, I always did layouts. I'd always do them the same size as the comic book page, the printed page, because that way you would see how big the drawing was, the impact of the image would have on the reader, right? So to me, even though these drawings are kind of crude, if it works here, it's going to work. You can just make the drawings better. If it doesn't work here, doesn't matter if the drawings are good. It's not really good storytelling. You solve everything. You solve everything here. You solve all the big important aspects of telling the story here. The other difference between working with Tony on the Phantom and working with Danny on Darkhawk is that I don't get a full script, so I don't know what he's saying. I don't know how much balloonage there will be, but as you can see, I am trying to leave areas that can be full of word balloons, where the dialogue or the narration can go, right? Danny and I worked together for like 25 issues, so I kind of have a feeling of like how much Danny would write. I'm thinking about it myself as a writer. I mean, I'm writing the story too as I'm drawing it. I get a plot, but I decide how many guys to put in a truck. I decided to put her at the bottom of the steps. They were in the plaza. I'm deciding where to put the camera. So I'm writing as I'm drawing it. I'm contributing. I'm not just drawing. It's not a recipe like draw this guy over here, looking at this guy over there. It's
right.
not.
Let me grab my template for this action page, and I'll just swap the faces. So
right.
So looking at these, you said you have an example of a script that you were going to take to the layout stage. You think we've got half an hour? You think we've got time to dig into that a bit?
Yeah. Let me get my. Oh, so I was going to show.
Oh yeah, please. And thanks to everybody who's been subscribing to the channel and clicking the like button and the subscribe bell and inflating the subscription balloon and whatever else you have to do. We really appreciate it. I think we're getting really, really close to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So thank you.
Okay, I don't know if this is going to work. Okay, I think I have to do it this way.
Oh, I
So
see.
here's my layout for the second page. Oh wait a minute. Well, you're seeing the pencils. So that's the pencils. Let me get. So this is the pencils of the second page. Right. Even though I was inking it myself, I really penciled it tightly because I just wanted to get, try to get back into the feeling. Right. So that's the pencils of the second page. And
did you ink your work in the initial series, Mike?
A lot of the time I did, and then when I didn't, Ricardo Villagran inked it, and okay, there. So there's the layout, which was done at the same size as the other layouts. Right.
That's
and
different.
Then what I did is
Are we looking at a different thing, Mike, or are your layouts that tight?
This is my layouts. Yeah.
My goodness.
I mean, it's not that tight. I mean, it's just it's like, it's kind of scribbly. There's a lot of, but I am thinking again of my perspective, and anything I can sort of figure, do that in the layout. It just saves work later on, right? One of the things I learned very early in my career was the sooner you solve your reference problems, your perspective problem, it's much easier to do perspective small, find your vanishing points, all that stuff. Then now when I go to the next thing, as you saw, it's there. All I have to do is draw it. So what I did was I took my little layouts, I blew them up, printed them out on my printer, put them on the light box, and then I could just go right over my pencils and just pencil over the top of it on a light box, which is what a lot of people did.
I think everyone is, when you said that, no, it's not that tight. I think our entire audience.
Look at this guy's head. Look at this guy's face. Right? Look at this guy's face. His face is.
I don't think we can see your cursor, sadly.
Look at this guy. You can see this guy's face, right?
Which one? In which panel?
Oh, you're still seeing. Why is it not showing? Hold on a second. This is vexing me. This is vexing me tonight.
We might have been looking at your pencils, and you said they were layouts and they weren't tight, and everyone went, "Okay, Mike."
Okay. This is my layout.
Oh, okay. All right. I can see from the thumbnail. All right. Everyone.
I mean, this guy's face is an X. This guy's got a Frankenstein head, right? I mean, but I got the gesture. I got enough here that I can do the drawing when I go to the next stage, right?
Gotcha.
I don't want to make it so tight. I don't want to make it so tight that I'm like tracing something. But if I work my perspective out here, it's easier to go and draw that building later.
Sure.
Right.
Okay, we all thought we were going crazy, Mike.
Yeah. No, that's how that's how
it comes right out of my pencil, looking perfect.
Yeah. See, so there.
All right.
Because I did that, it's easy to go in and it's drawing, but all the thinking is done. So all I have to do is draw. I mean, you have to think when you draw, but I save all the grief. And so I laid out the whole, that's how I have basically worked my whole career. And so here, let me go down here. Okay.
And the word on the street is that next week we may have another host joining us. That's the rumor. That's the scuttlebutt is that JAMAR will be back next week. Fingers crossed. Everyone put your hands on your YouTube.
Right. So here is Dan Chichester, who I used to work with at Marvel years ago, was kind enough to send me along a Daredevil plot. So I don't know if people can read this, but basically this is fairly tight because he's describing, you know, exterior scene shot, tight close up of Daredevil, close up on Daredevil's head, angle on the gathering of the rats, right? Angle on one of the doors on the ship, tight close up of the Billy Club, right? So there's like that's 3 pages. It's a splash page and the second and third page. Okay. Now, again, there's always a little leeway. You're given that license as a creative person with a plot to play around with that, right? And I really prefer that with superhero stuff. So now the next step, I would go through and I would read that. All right. So the next step would be to get my reference. The next step would be to get my reference.
So you go through the script and say, I need a picture of rats. I need a picture of a warehouse. I need a picture of.
Well, I'll show you because I'll show you that right now. And this is really important because it also helps inform your imagination. If you don't know what a rat looks like, or you're not really good with a rat, you don't know what a ship looks like, you don't know what the space looks like. If I say the bridge of the Enterprise, most people go, okay, I know what that looks like. You've seen it a million times. If I say the Death Star, you've seen it, right? You don't have to think about it. You know what it is, right? If I say the Batcave, you still, even though there's different interpretations of it, you still kind of have an idea of what. If I go the deck of a Russian trawler, okay, some people may not have any idea whatsoever of what they're drawing. So the first step is read the script. Second step is get your reference.
Well, I would even go that even the things that people do know, it's even more important. Might be equally important to get your reference, because you get one of those knobs on the Enterprise wrong, you're going to get a letter.
Right. But what I found was that the reference may help jog a visual idea, because one of the things about laying out a page, like I had to do an issue of Quasar, and I think I've talked about this before. I had to do an issue of Quasar working with Mark Grunwald, and he's fighting Modam, the female version of MODOK, and they're fighting at the Statue of Liberty. Great. Plenty of pictures, and this is analog time, no internet.
Sure.
So I had references, photos of the Statue of Liberty, and I think I went to the library, but he ends up inside the head of the Statue of Liberty. Oh my God, I could not find. I found books of the Statue of Liberty. I could not find the inside of the head of the Statue of Liberty. I think I found one schematic drawing in a book, because there was the stairs that you could take up, and then you could look out of those.
Sure. And no one ever points their camera inside. They point out that.
So I had to build that set based upon that one little drawing.
Wow.
Or blueprint or whatever it was that showed the steps going up, right? Because I couldn't find a picture. I'd never been to the Statue of Liberty myself, so yeah. There was no way I could,
that large copper skull that's inside there. So
right,
so creepy.
Exactly. You didn't know what her eyes are in the back, staring, right? But my point is that your task now is to draw action taking place in this room. Well, how big is the room? right? How big, can you stand up? Are you hunched over? Are there beams? Are there, is there a railing? And that affects your staging. So the first thing I do is if I'm looking at a ship, okay, I've done this long enough now that I've drawn ships. I've drawn people on ships. I've drawn old tramp steamers. So I have already a general idea in my head of what a ship looks like and what the stuff on the deck of a ship looks like. At least enough for layout purposes. But again, why not just take 5 minutes and spend the time? You may find something like, oh, right. So I'm going to show you this here. Okay, so, and it's at a dock in New York, right? So here's a cargo ship. They've got those big crane thingies, Now this is a Marvel comic, so there is license, to play around. But here's a ship, door. It's also this Daredevil, the Daredevil that had the armor.
Okay.
I do think I drew once I drew a card featuring him, right? So, I just took 5 minutes and did, cargo ship, door on a ship, another door on a ship, a aerial view of the ship, of the dockyard, right? So now I see these things, and again, I automatically start getting ideas for shapes and angles, and where would I put my camera, and what would be a cool angle to show. So, and then I did one. I found some pictures of rats, right? And so that's really important, is to do that first. So now you're armed with information. I remember when I first started, you get a lot of information, like, oh, you need to have a morgue, which it had in the old days. You'd have a morgue, which was, you'd go and you'd get a bunch of magazines and you'd cut them up, and, oh, here's a picture of the White House, and here's a picture here's Thomas Jefferson, here's a picture of a taxi cab, here's a picture of a fire engine, and you would fill your morgue with reference long before there was anything like a Google. And Albert Dorn, a very famous illustrator, some people may know of him, supposedly had a staff of people who did nothing but make his morgue, his clip files. Now, sometimes as an illustrator, you would the agency would send you reference, or they would work out. You would get the models and the photographer, and then they would, you do your layout, and then you would get the models to take the poses, like the famous James Bama poses of Steve Steve Holland, with the ripped shirt, right? So, but in comic books, you ain't got that time. You don't have that budget, right? So Google is a lifesaver, So second thing is you do that. Then after you do that, okay, so how are we doing on time?
You were doing great. We're doing great. Got plenty of time.
So I've got a layout, comic book size. Let me pull up my script here, and I will read the description.
So many possibilities.
This is a splash page, right? Exit New York Harbor, night, Daredevil's black and white radar point of view of the area, rusting hulks of cranes, cable, rotting piers. Their area is dominated, though, by an aged, enormous Russian cargo ship, Silric markings along its side. So to me, that's the splash. Then the next panel is a close-up of Daredevil's fingertips, feeling the railing and the rust on the railing. Then a close-up of Daredevil's head, mostly in silhouette, and we catch a hint of one of the horns on his head as he inclines his head, slightly listening. And then an angle on the gathering of the rats on the deck of the ship and his shadow basically going across the rodents. And then Dan writes, most of the rest of the images, don't necessarily connect from one to another. They're meant as an intriguing sampling of things that happen on board prior to the ship blowing up. Angle on one of the ship's round portal windows, streaked with grime, and the window is shattering outward as something strikes it savagely from the inside. Tight close-up of the Daredevil's billy club smashing against Bullseye's wrists, the villain's hand forced to open to drop a large, vicious-looking throwing knife. We don't fully establish this as Bullseye here, just the glove. And if you remember, he has those gloves with like the rings around his forearms,
Sure.
the white gloves with the rings. Angle on a metal door leading down into the ship, suddenly as it's being hit from within. So something on the other side is like smashing into it. And then we, another panel of dozens of smoking bullet shells clattering on the deck. Same angle as before on the metal door, but except it's more, you see even more of it being dented. Angle on a long explosive fuse hissing and sparking. Same angle as before of the metal door, but now it's suffering from the impact within, shaking badly as a severe bowed out shape. And then angle on the rats scattering with mad panic, clawing over each other as they run in every direction. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 12 scenes, right? 12 panels, 12 images that I have there. So if I go through 3 pages, right, that's 4 images a page. But of course, one of them is going to be the splash page. So that basically gives me one for the splash and then 12 images to spread out over the next 2 pages, right? And so I'm thinking, well, how do I want to show what's an exciting image that would say Daredevil, right? So I could.
Are we starting with the splash? We're starting with the splash page.
We're starting with the splash page, right?
Now,
so
are you doing a layout here for multiple pages on us like you had on your notebook, or are you just going to do this whole screen here?
I'm going to do it on screen. Yeah, I'm going to do it on screen. Yeah, because I don't have my camera set up to do the.
But we're just going to start. We're going to do one page at a time. We're not going to do them as thumbnails.
I'm just going to sort of wing it, right?
I like it.
So you can see it, right? Okay, good.
Yep.
So what I might do is I might try this, right? And this is what I would do on another sheet of, on a sheet of paper in my sketchbook. I go, do I want to do a down shot, right? So if I had the shot of the boat, You know, I'm just thinking like the big shapes now of the boat, right? And there's the dock, and this is a container ship, so you know you got to put where the containers are. So you know, I might start out, and I'm just sort of just thinking like, okay, this is sort of like an angle
Mm-hmm.
Daredevil would see. Maybe there's some rotting piers. Maybe there's, you know, water, reflections on the water. And then maybe, you know, there's like one of those big crane thingies, right? Now, these are what I call thinking drawings, right? I'm just trying to think of like what's going to make an interesting drawing, right? Because I'm looking back, I'm looking at my my reference of the of those big crane things, right? So I'm thinking, oh, you know, they've got those, you know, this is big long thing, right? And I go, well, is that? And this is supposed to be Daredevil's radar, right? And so it's a black and white image of his radar. So first to think of like, well, what is the setting? Then I have to think about how right, he's got that wing, you know, his sonar, right? He's got those little sonar things, right? So I'm trying to think of how do I want to depict this as it's his right, it's his sonar. And I'm thinking, well, what would Daredevil be looking at, right? He'd be looking at the, you know, he'd be looking at the ship. So let's just say, for the hell of it, I do this on another, add another layer here. Right. So if I take this layer and I just, right, what I would have is I would have an image. Make this darker. Do I have an image like that? You know what I mean? Like wherever his radar is pinging, right? It could be kind of complicated, right? Because, you know, do I, you know, how complicated do I get with, you know, like all the boxes? Do I make the stuff closer, have a thicker, you know, like a thicker line?
I love that you do this, Mike. I love that you think this through.
Right. So would this have a thicker line? Right. And
you're making your own craft
thinner lines. Right. So probably what I would do if I was going to do this is I would draw this out. I would draw this out as big blocky shapes. Right. I would draw this out as a big blocky shape. Right. And I would imagine as his radar went further away, if there's piers and pilings and stuff like that over there, it would fade like a bat. You know, you get a stronger reaction to something that's closer to you and less of a reaction to something that went away. So my instinct is to then, if I had if I made this the center, by the time you got out to here, right, these lines closer on this would be, like I said, heavier, and then lines here would be very light. They would be much lighter, right? Because they're further away.
Sure.
So I would basically draw this out as almost like when you do a 3D thing. Like, you know, when you do your 3D thing, you start with like big forms.
Sure.
Right? So the ship would be big. The ship would be big, blocky forms. Right? And so the pier here would be smaller. These would be bigger. And then if there was the crane, you know, that would be thicker. So I would get an image of that, but just made up of thinner. It would all be within the circle of the radar, right? So that's probably how I would do it, and I would focus it in on where he would be looking, which I would imagine would be at the conning tower, where the ship where the captain would be or whatever, right? And I'm thinking that where he is here, he would be like standing. So this is his point of view. So he's standing on one of those big things going over the top of the ship, right?
One of those crane arms.
Yeah. One of those crane arms, right? Yeah. So I would be thinking of the crane arms. So these would be thicker. So I have to basically draft it all out, and then by hand, or I would do the circles, and I might have to make them, tighter, and then they would get wider and wider and wider and wider and wider and wider. So, and then wider and lighter, right? So that's, or that's one idea. The other idea might be to, since it's his point of view, I mean, I think he would be on top of that. The other thing is you could do, say you do the opposite. Say you do the opposite. You have the ship and you're below the ship. It doesn't mean he has to be on top, right? And then you have the things going over the top. So I'm thinking, here's the thing. Now, the question I have from the script that kind of sticks in my mind is the fact that there's the Russian writing on the ship.
Right.
Here I could have, no, I don't know. I imagine Daredevil could feel as I understand Daredevil, he could feel the writing in the paint. But I don't know whether his radar is sufficient enough to be able to read writing. It's not like Braille, right? So again, I would probably have to talk with Dan about that. And maybe at that point the character's radar had changed or whatever. But say I do a low angle, and you're looking up, right? And you've got I could do the same thing. What's he looking at? So if he's looking at that, I would start
what would be your consideration between the two layouts? Like, what would be the deciding factor? Which one you would go with? Would it be dramatic effect? Would it be some other reason?
Yes, it's all for superheroes. It's all dramatic, right? Now, one thing I do know. Here's a horizon line, right? If you're above the horizon line, you see it's like a map. You see things. If you're below the horizon line, things become monumental, right? They also become interesting because you're looking up. Both of these are interesting because this is not a standard point of view that almost anybody ever has, right?
Right.
Right. Nobody's standing on top of this looking down, right? Now, if this was not Daredevil's point of view using his radar, you could have Daredevil,
Right.
standing. You could have him standing, and you could actually have, like smoke coming from and you could almost make all of this. You could almost make all of this solid black, right?
Right.
Right. And you would have his little figure up there. And, you've got, high contrast photos. You've got lights on the ship. This could almost all be black. You've got the rotting pylons. You've got lines coming down from the ship, right? You've got, lights in the background. You can make it all like real smoky and atmospheric, you know. So I might think, you got the gangplank going up, maybe some cool shadows going across, you know. And so when I start laying out stuff, I really work this rough just to sort of build the idea in my mind and start thinking, okay, well, which do I like, right? Which do I like? What serves the story? My main job is to serve the story, right? So, I think of, like Gene Colan would draw those really cool, like atmospheric,
Sure.
right?
And the layout stage, this layout stage, is that primarily for your own purposes, or is this meant to be shared with anybody? Or is this
at this point, this is just me. This is just me thinking, right? This is just me thinking, right? So I go, okay. And then I'm also aware of the fact that there's going to be a title, and there's going to be narration, right? There's going to be narration. There's going to be credits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking all that, right? Now I really like this image. I think it's very cool and very effective, but that's not what Dan wrote. Dan wrote Daredevil's point of view.
Right.
Right.
Well,
so
let me ask you, this is a question from Tony DePaul via YouTube's, who asks, why does the artist not get paid, not get a writing credit on the Marvel method? Why does the artist not get a writing credit?
Stan Lee.
That's a short answer. That's a perfect answer.
Sorry, heroes, no credit. Right. So again, if I look at them small as thumbnails, so I'm thinking, well, what's going to look? It would be a lot of labor, to have basically an image that was made up of to have an image that was made up of right. So I would have to draw, and then because basically this is what you would see. You would see the whole image.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It would be made up of, and then when you're up here, the lines would be shorter, and then they would be, maybe these lines would be bigger. Right? So you would basically see the whole image.
And you're doing this sketch digitally for our benefit, right, Mike?
Right,
If you were doing
yeah.
this, if you had this gig, that you'd be doing this on paper and in a sketchbook.
I used to always do them on loose sheets of paper too, right? But basically, yeah. So this is what that would look like, right? I'm thinking the image would basically be almost like you drew it and then put a screen,
Yeah, like
over
white
right?
Zipatone.
Right, Zipatone over, right. So you would, but it would basically look like a ship, and you would look, and then when you got to the crane part, the lines, but it would all be in that circle, right? So I'm thinking like the whole thing would be like that, right? Which would be a lot of work. Would be kind of cool, because you're seeing what he's seeing, right? But again, I like to. This image was in my head, right. Sometimes you draw an image out of your head just to see whether the first one you had works. So that's what I call, this is what I would tell students, is what I call the fly around, right? The fly around. Up, down, I go from the top, from a bird's eye to a worm's eye, right? Where do I put the camera? What serves the story, right? I think that could be an interesting image. It would be a lot of work. I don't know for the viewer if it would be as exciting as this more Norrish image. But again, this is something that you have to deal with, right? Because that's what the writer wants. It wants you as the viewer to see from Daredevil's point of view, right? But because I also have this image in my head,
right,
I want to draw it out. Now, what if I took just again another idea? What if I combined those images so you basically had
the concentric circles stemming from
right,
there,
all coming out, all going through, or maybe not on him, right? Maybe he's still all black. Maybe he's still all black. But maybe what if the whole rest of the image was the concentric circles going through the whole thing, right?
I love it.
Right. So I might just think, okay, well maybe I could do that. Maybe I can combine my idea and his idea, right? And just through the whole, the whole image is just those his radar, going out through the whole ship and everything, right? That's really crappy, but
No, but the concept, we get it. We get it.
right,
This is
right. You get the idea, right? So again, this is one of the things I like about the Marvel method. You know, I think because you see the little figure and you see all the other stuff, to me that's more exciting than this. Even though this is his point of view and everything, and he's looking down, right? Part of the thing too is to consider is right. If I draw a ship, right? What angle do I draw? If I draw the ship, and let's say you were right on top of the ship, and let's say there was a smokestack, and it was, you know, so let's say I do this all the time, right? I try to find an idea that, so let's say that was your image, kind of powerful, kind of strong, kind of abstract, right? What if then I did the same concept, right? I did the same concept of the, you know, the circles.
of the circles. Yeah. Cool.
Right. And so he's looking down, right? Maybe it's almost like, what if this was his feet? You know, like and he's standing on those, you know, cables or something, and you're looking down on the ship, right? And again, you know, I'm not spending time doing a really great drawing. I'm spending my time thinking. That's the most important part of this. And what happens very often is you'll start on something when you're younger, and you get in love with drawing a thing before you get in love with the story, and you kind of go off the rails. Maybe you shut yourself off to ideas. So I'm trying to think of ideas, right? So if I do something like if you're Daredevil and you're looking down, you would see your feet, right? If Daredevil is standing,
yeah, you're you're doing what the brief asks you to do. It's his perspective,
right? And he's standing on, and he's looking down. What are you going to see? You're going to see, you know, maybe you don't even see all the foot. You only see part of one foot, and up here, you know, you see another foot, but you see the ship. Will that read, if you do that whole thing, will that read as a ship? Or, you know, and then this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or rather, right? And then, you know, you've got your smoke, and as your smoke gets closer, right? Does that, you know, how does that read? Is that going to be clear? You know, do you, I mean, that's an interesting graphic of his radar going down. You know, is this all right? So I ask myself questions like that, right? Does this, when it gets to here, right? Maybe we don't see the feet. maybe the feet are too confusing, right? Maybe because you can't really read the shape. But again, this to me is the most exciting part, right? I ask myself that question. Okay, but I can't answer it unless I draw it, right? So if I go, okay, the feet look stupid. That's just a dumb idea, That's just a dumb idea. So I take I take the feet out,
but worth trying.
But I keep that idea of the radar. I don't know. How much detail do I need to put on that ship? This might read, better, right? This might read better because if I render out the whole image like that, it's going to look like you'll be able to see the ship. Here, this is like a cool idea, but it's almost like something that would work better in animation.
Yeah, it's almost felt like you were doing a WPA poster where they would be very graphic,
right,
and like almost minimalist.
Right. But again, you have an idea, prove it, put it on a sheet of paper, draw it, and go, okay, well, I had this idea. That's kind of interesting. It's very, Daredevil like Superman being right over the ship, but it might be the kind of thing that, with special effects, you would have the Aquaman, radar going out and pinging off things, and so you would see the pinging, and maybe in that way it would read better. Then as a drawing, you might not be able to get maybe kind of confusing. But again, I had the idea, so I've sort of done the fly around. I've done, high angle, directly high angle, and then low angle, right? And right now, to me, I really like this. I really like seeing, I really like seeing Daredevil. And I would try to do it so I could get his horn. In there. So, I'd get him, on top of the.
That's great.
You see one of his, you see he's got his billy clubs, and he's like hunched over.
Nicely done.
I think
that's great. I love that.
And so my directors go, I like that better. And I make all this whole thing read as basically like white zip over the top of the drawing. Right?
Yeah, perfect.
Although this one does work too, but I don't know whether I find that as an exciting a splash page as that.
Yeah, I feel like your second one, the bottom right one there, has more drama. It says basically what you need to know and not too much more. You don't need to know how many cargo containers are on the boat. You don't need to know what the radar system looks like. This shows you what you need to see. You need to see that it's a large boat. You got the Cyrillic text possibly well in frame. You've got Daredevil in a cool spot.
Right, and then you got these like cool like rotting pilings. You could even have like some like a rat sitting on top of it. Right.
Love it.
Right. You've got get some, there can be even more pilings. You've got the gangplank, and again, make it very sort of foggy, kind of like one of those Gene Colan like really cool mystery shots. I just think this is way better. This is way. I'm much more satisfied with this, even though I could pull that off. These shapes just seem to be. The other thing is, one of the things I've learned is that triangles cutting through compositions add dynamics and excitement. So even within this one, you've got triangles. Triangle, 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 kind of a triangle. This is kind of a triangle. Triangles. And then especially if you have triangles going one way, then you have triangles going another way. It's just exciting, right? And triangles can become perspective. So this is a triangle, right? These are, angled, and I sort of think of, and then you've got the triangles of that. So to me, anytime you've got shapes going across, shape going back, just on a purely abstract, that's interesting. These things are actually pointing right at the, at the thing. So they're almost like little arrows. So I think about, just on a very abstract level, about that. And again, I don't know where who I learned that from, any particular artist I learned that from, but at some point, I became very aware of that, of just, angles and triangles, and it can do, big shapes, just make a composition interesting, especially if they go against each other. I did, when I was first studying storyboarding, I started storyboarding on the Lobo episode of Superman. Was my first one, and I was working with Dan Reba, and he helped me quite a lot. And I read the shot by shot book, and I think at a certain point I came across a website called 1,000 Frames of Hitchcock. In every Hitchcock movie, there were 1,000 frames. And one of the things I noticed is that, and I probably mentioned this before, is that Hitchcock would have one shot where you would have a person and it would be doing this. It might even be a two shot. So this is actually pointing at the person you're talking to. Then the next scene would be a reverse. No, it may be closer, but he did that all the time. So go look at that site, 1,000 Frames of Hitchcock, and
yeah.
I really noticed. Pardon?
I was looking for my copy of Shot by Shot.
Yeah, and so that's the first page. So I think I've settled on.
Yeah, I think page 2 and so on. We'll have to wait for the sequel episode, Mike. I think we're well past time, but I loved every moment of that. So thank you, everybody who who were with us through that. I didn't have we took care of a lot of the questions along the way. I don't think we have any outstanding questions. Maybe it was that hat, Mike. But I thought this was a great episode.
me hat.
Your artistic chapeau.
My
fantastic.
chapeau. Yeah, I put on my thinking cap.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. It's good to be back. I'm sorry we took 2 weeks off. Part of my some health problems with me. I'm fine now. Everything's dandy. But hopefully next week.
And thanks to Dan Chichester for sharing a script again.
Thank you so much. That's so nice. And I think next week we're going to have Jamar back. So even more reason to tune in.
Maybe a guest, I think.
Oh, fingers crossed. But thank you, everybody. Please remember to hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, click all the things, and tell your friends about the episodes because we're really close to 1,000 subscribers, and that puts us in a whole other tier with YouTube, and that will be great.
Yes. And, again, you can always ask us questions during the week, give us feedback, give us ideas of what you would like to see in future episodes. If there's a subject you'd like to see one of us tackle.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Well, Mike, where can folks find you online?
The best place to find me, Facebook, and Draw Manley on Instagram.
Fantastic. And you can find me at middleagecomic.com. I'm on Webtoons, Tapas, Go Comics. Thank you all so much for being here. And Mike, I think we're still in the pandemic. I think
that's true.
Jamar would yell at us if we didn't take care of our hygiene.
Right.
So remember, everybody, wash those Kirby hands.
See you next week with clean mitts.